Hey everybody, happy Monday. Welcome to another episode of Mindful Morning with me, Ashley Walkneen. Today I want to talk about self-control. I was on my way home from Tennessee yesterday and in the car talking to my husband. I'd asked him, how was your week? And, he just seemed really disappointed and frustrated in himself. And he said, it wasn't really that good. In general, his biggest hang up in life really seems to be his weight. He's always, struggling going up and down with his weight, starting new lifestyles and diets, and finds it really difficult to stay committed and consistent with that. So, he'd put a plan together for himself before I left for the week about how he would stay consistent because he'd been doing really well for a while. And so he said that, he was consistent all week. And then a day or two before I got back, he just kind of lost it and went out and ate a whole bunch of junk food. So he was really disappointed himself. So it got me thinking about self-control. And I just mentioned to him in our conversation about the work of George Lowenstein. George Lowenstein is a behavioral economist. He is a economics and psychology professor at Carnegie Mellon University, and he studies something really fascinating called the hot-cold empathy gap. And basically, what this is when we're in a cold emotional state, it really just means that we're not faced with any kind of strong emotion at that point. So when we set goals for ourselves, we make that decision from a cold emotional state. And when my husband sets a weight loss goal for himself, it's from a cold emotional state. And we can't imagine feeling any other way than the way that we're feeling right now. It's really difficult for us to project ourselves into any other kind of emotional state in the future. So we underestimate the power of intense emotional drive or a hot state, and we overestimate the power of intellectual drive, our ability to make the healthy, right, responsible choice when we're in a hot state situation. So, we get into this hot state moment where for my husband, it's like he's feeling very hungry or a craving shows up. And if you ask him from a cold state, he'll be like, oh, I'm not going to have any problems with that. But in the moment, it's like we become completely overtaken, almost like we become another person. And logic goes completely out the door when it comes to self-control. Our willingness is much higher when we're in a cold state than it is when we're in a hot state. So other situations where hot states show up, besides trying to change a habit or achieve a goal, are things like procrastination. We create a plan for ourselves and we don't think we're going to procrastinate, then we find ourselves really not wanting to do something, and it's very difficult for us to make the right choice at that moment, right? Another situation where hot states show up is fear. If you're preparing for an interview, for example, when you're in a cold state and you're preparing, you think, oh, it's going to go fine. I'm going to be really confident. Everything is going to be great. And if you underprepare, then you're completely taken off guard by the intensity of this strong emotion that shows up when you're actually in the situation itself. So the question is, how do we deal with these hot states so that we're not completely overwhelmed by them, so that we don't sabotage what we want in the long term because of this transient hot state mood that we find ourselves in? So, some tips that I have for you, uh, 4 tips. 2 of them are for when you're in the cold state, and 2 of them are for when you're in the hot state. The first tip I have is to assume that you're going to be in a hot state situation and to plan for that. Ask yourself, when was the last time I was in this hot state situation? What did I find myself wanting to do or to stop doing? How was I feeling? What was I thinking? And how can I plan specifically for that hot state situation? The second tip I have is for avoiding hot state situations as much as you can by being prepared and setting some ground rules for yourself. For example, My husband and I, we try not to go grocery shopping when we're really hungry because we just become crazy compulsive buyers. We buy a bunch of junk food or we buy too much food because we're grocery shopping in a hot state situation. So another rule that we've set for ourselves is we try and prepare food in advance. If my husband goes to work and he doesn't have a meal on hand, lunchtime rolls around, he ends up in this hot state where he's really hungry, and all of a sudden self-control just kind of goes out the window. I'm sure you can all relate to something like that. I certainly can. So setting some ground rules for yourself to avoid being in hot state situations as much as you can through planning. The third tip I have is for when you're actually in the hot state, and that is to avoid taking any kind of major action or making any kind of major decisions until you cool down again, literally. You can think about emotional states the way you think about the weather. Sometimes it's really sunny out, everything feels really easy, it's easy to make that healthy right choice. And then sometimes it's like we're caught in an emotional storm, and when we get caught up in that, it feels like the storm is never going to end. But just reminding yourself that moods are like weather. They're transient. They come and they go, and eventually the clouds will part and things will cool down again. And just waiting to make any major decisions until that happens and you have a clear head. And the last tip that I have for when you're actually in a hot state is to only make choices in the here and now. Don't worry about the future. Just tell yourself, I only have to say no this time. For example, if we have a goal and we know we have to make this same choice repeatedly over and over, like my husband, oh, I can't have a piece of pizza for the next 6 months to achieve my goal. If you think about that when you're in a hot state, you just feel even more deprived. It just makes the hot state feel so much more intense. So if you just bring it back to the here and now, and I only have to say no to this impulse this time, and not worry about the future in that hot state situation. That can be really helpful. So 4 tips just to recap. The first is to plan and assume that you will find yourself in a hot state situation at some point. Prepare for that. The second is to avoid hot state situations as much as you can by planning and by setting some rules for yourself. The third is to avoid making major decisions or taking major action while you know that you're in a hot state until you cool down again. And just seeing that hot state as like a weather pattern that will eventually pass. And the last one is to just focus on saying no this time in the here and now, and that's all you have to do. So I will put these tips in the Mindful Morning Toolbox. I'll also add some questions that will help you plan for hot state situations a little bit better and imagine yourself in those situations. If you're not opted into the Mindful Morning Toolbox, it's where I keep all the actionable resources, cheat sheets, and exercises that go along with the Mindful Morning episodes. It's really to help you take this from an intellectual understanding to actually being able to apply it in your life. So if you're not opted in, you can follow the link and sign up for that. And if you liked this, if you got a lot out of this episode, please leave a comment, write a review. Let me know about your hot state situations. And of course, share this with other people because you never know what somebody might need to hear today. All right, I'll see you all tomorrow. Have a great day.